Hello and welcome to the weekly commodity market update. I'm your host, Brownfield's Will Robinson, joined as always by the University of Missouri's Ben Brown. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Will.
Anything interesting last week you did? I know you're getting ready to go to Kansas today.
No, I went to Ohio actually last week. I had a friend that got married, and so drove out to Delaware, Ohio this past weekend. Got back on Sunday. I had a really nice time. I will say the thing from just an agronomic perspective, grain market side, I was taken back of how green the wheat has turned in the last week. There was some wheat fields in southern Illinois that already look like they've had the fertilizer applied to the wheat crop. I don't think that's actually true, but it was certainly as green can be. So.
I guess, well, whether it's markets or not, you're always nerding out about the wheat, right?
That's right. It's fun to see wheat. Southern Illinois is the only place in that state that grows wheat. I mean, we think of Illinois as pretty much a corn and soybean exclusive state, but they do grow some wheat in the southern part, and it looked pretty good.
So just talking about, how the crops are coming along, let's look at markets from the past week. What changes did you see?
Yep. So diving right into the markets, we saw an 8-cent increase in that nearby corn contract for May up to $7.54. 14-cent increase in that new crop corn for December to $6.66. Old crop soybeans up 28 cents to $16.98. New crop soybeans were up 18 cents to $14.99. The components for soybean oil was up a little bit. Soybean meal was down $5.70 per short ton. And then the wheat complex that's been incredibly volatile over the last couple of weeks. We saw an increase of 55 cents to $11.51 for that old crop wheat, and then 52-cent increase for new crop wheat in July to $11.22.
What kind of market highlights did we see?
Yeah, so U.S. ethanol production on the week was relatively flat. It was down 2,000 barrels per day. However, we remain at very strong levels. Ethanol has been a shining star on the demand side for corn, and we continue to see it remain at strong levels. However, the international export demand has really started to pick up. We saw a very strong week of export sales again. Basically 80.3 million total bushels of corn were sold from the United States last week. 72.3 million of that was old crop corn. That represents the second largest week this marketing year, following the record the week before. So a very good 2-week period for corn export sales. Soybean sales last week totaled 63.5 million bushels, of which 46 million of that was old crop soybeans. So again, we've had a lot of interest in those new crop soybean sales basically for 22, 23, but starting to see some old crop sales come in as international buyers start to shore up product. Both of those, corn and soybeans, were nearly twice the levels that we typically see this time of year. So again, some strong international demand. However, we continue to see what I'm going to call softer export inspections. So actually getting on the boat and going across the sea. Basically, U.S. export inspections were down for corn and wheat, just like they were the week prior, flat for soybeans, and up for grain sorghum. And so we'll have to continue to watch those as the weeks come. Certainly some positive news from the export sales. Would like to see, if you're interested in higher prices and stronger demand for product, like to see that turn into actual shipments.
Before we really jump into today's topic, which is inflation, just on those exports real fast, you say that inspection totals are kind of trending downward off of what we've been seeing. At one point, does that become slightly concerning from an export standpoint?
I'm already concerned on it from a soybean perspective. I do think that when we get to the end of this marketing year, July and August, that we're going to see very strong soybean exports, especially when soybean harvest, the early soybean harvest starts here in the United States. Our bids for the summer months have on occasion been cheaper than Brazilian beans. And as a result, we've seen some purchases for that time period. So I do expect to see stronger export inspections again this year, like what we did last year for soybeans. The next 2 months are probably pretty critical for corn exports to hit some of the targets, some of the new targets even for USDA, new and old targets for corn exports from USDA. And the next 2 months are probably pretty critical for corn exports.
All right. So really going back toward what the target conversation is today on inflation. So we saw some news coming out of Argentina about them raising the export tax on several goods, but notably impacting soybeans and the soybean market. And that was due to inflation. They're trying to combat inflation. The country has said they're declaring war on inflation. So what impact directly does that have within the U.S. market?
Yeah, you bring up a great point, whether you realize it or not, Will. This shows the difference in how different countries around the world handle macroeconomic policy. We do not here in the United States. Our position has always been, or we do not do export taxes here in the United States. Our position here as a capitalistic society in the United States has always been that product is allowed to flow wherever the value of that dollar is the highest. If that's the international market, we have to work harder domestically here to keep that product in the United States. If the value or the buyers are the strongest and have the most money to spend here in the United States, that product can stay here in the United States. So we do not deviate here in the United States from that policy, or at least we haven't in the past. Argentina is completely on the opposite side of that. They use export taxes as a way to, one, raise government revenue, and then two, to control the flow of goods in and out of the country. And I think they're using both of those priorities here with these export taxes, or raising the export taxes. They need money to fund their government, especially coming out of COVID when they had large government expenditures like we did here in the United States as well. I'm not trying to shy away from our budget deficit. Argentina has some challenges as well. But then the second thing is to keep those soybean oil and soybean meal components within their country to help fight food inflation. Argentina has an economy, or a population that is, while better than maybe some African countries or Middle East, they still have a more vulnerable population than some other well-developed countries around the world. So they're very cautious, and their government's very cautious about raising food prices or the increasing food prices and the impact on their economy. So all that said and done, we've seen them play around with these export taxes in the past. They lowered them at the end of 2020 down 3%. They then reinstated those last year, and now they're going another 2% up to 33%, which basically makes the components for soybeans the same. The components the same as soybeans is what I was trying to say there. I don't know why I got tongue-tied, but you think of the impacts that this has, and Argentina is the world's largest exporter of soybean oil and soybean meal. And so they are a dominant player in that. The signal here is it's a lower crush margin for their domestic crushers. It amounts to about a $15 per ton reduction in the profit margin for crushers within Argentina. That lowers their incentive to crush at higher levels. Now, does that mean that they're not going to crush? No, it just means it lowers their incentive, because we've certainly seen margins that have supported some of this. So we do expect some deviation that the United States could pick up on and participate. However, with global oil prices being as high as they are for vegetable oil products, I expect that Argentina will still be a dominant player in the global vegetable oil trade market.
Looking domestically specifically, at the market's job of pricing in the inflation that we saw coming into this year, it's been working on that the past several weeks, but it's really hard to say, how much of any price increases are due to inflation, especially when you have so many factors going on globally, looking at demand questions from China, looking at obviously the Russian-Ukrainian situation there. So how much of a role is inflation, do you think, playing a role in the market right now, and how do you really determine what that amount is?
I believe it depends on the market. We're probably seeing a little bit of inflationary pressure in wheat. it's probably harder to find it in some of the other commodities. And I know there's people out there that feel like inflation fits into the commodity as a way to secure or provide a backstop against, assets, deteriorating assets. The best way that United States citizens have always handled a backstop against inflation is in the housing and real estate market. And so I would say that if we're talking about land markets, yeah, we're seeing some inflationary pressure in the land markets. Grain commodities, it's a little bit harder because, and several of the reasons you mentioned, all these competing fundamental factors. But really, from the standpoint that we still have a lot of market factors of traditional buyers and sellers hedging their products in the market, they continue to be, the dominating driver, if you will. So to answer your question, inflation could have a small part, but it is a relatively small part in the grain markets. A lot of the increases that we've seen have actually some very supportive fundamentals underneath them. Soybeans, a very small crop, or a smaller crop in southern Brazil. Central Brazil had a decent crop that certainly doesn't make up in any way for the disastrous crop in southern Brazil. And of course, then all the impacts in wheat. And then when we turn and look at corn, corn has some pretty strong demand at the moment. International demand for product, and then here domestically demand for ethanol. So overall, yes, pretty low would be the inflationary impact in commodity markets.
So really just looking at that, the larger impacts that inflation might have within the market would be creating new fundamentals, like the situation in Argentina, where they're increasing their export tax, creating a strengthening fundamental in the U.S. market. So situations like that, instead of a direct one-to-one, inflation went up by this much, or this is how much the dollar was inflated, so this is how much crops will be inflated.
Yeah, not only, so I'll even take that one step. If the dollar strengthens, that has a negative inverse impact on commodity prices typically, because it hurts our ability to export product, given how big exports represent in some of our commodities, especially soybeans. Soybeans has one of the higher export shares. So an increase in the dollar would actually weaken the soybean price.
All right. Well, looking at the factors going on moving forward, do you expect any similar situations like we saw this past weekend in Argentina as they raised that rate?
No, probably. So say your question again.
Well, just like, is there, I guess, to reword that, a potential of seeing that elsewhere through other competitors of maybe higher tax rates on exports?
So there's not a lot of countries that are major soybean producers that have that same system. And so there's only really a couple that we really care about. And the risk is probably not there for other countries to increase their export taxes. The risk that we face in the soybean complex would be that if countries start banning product for whatever reason. I look at China, and I don't think they're going to ban soybean product, but COVID is not over there. I think we're benefiting here in the United States a little bit, that we seem to be coming out of COVID. We're rolling back restrictions. And China, they're going the opposite way, and their economy is starting to shut down and slow down again. And the ability to unload soybeans at their ports is becoming a challenge.
All right. Well, a good conversation on inflationary pressures there. I appreciate it, Ben. So looking at reports coming up, we have the ethanol report tomorrow, export sales on Thursday, and then cattle on feed on Friday. So livestock people, keep an eye on that. Thank you for joining us. I'm Will Robinson on Brownfield.